do anything militarily if Russia annexes it. And I suspect they think the same thing would happen in Taiwan. But I think the Chinese are perhaps kind of more strategic and long, kind of foresighted than Putin is. The Chinese have an ideology, and they have a kind of institutional setup that Putin doesn't really have. Putin is a one-man show, and President Xi, he's a very kind of, he's a sort of one-man
individual thing again, Professor.
But I think that's different. I think that's different in China. I think it's much less individualized in China than it is in Russia. That's actually the good news. That in some sense, once Putin goes, it's hard to sort of see. One can, it seems more difficult to imagine that this agenda will continue. Whereas the Chinese agenda is much more deeply seated and institutionalized than Putin's agenda. That's why.
Obviously, the Russian Duma, in its entirety, supported the decision of Vladimir Putin, and I think Russians would beg to differ about it being some monolithic place where everyone just worships this cult of Putin. Similarly, as you say, obviously in China. But how quick was China to immediately replace Visa and MasterCard with Union Pay, the second biggest credit card in the world? How quickly were they to say we will start to take wheat? And how quickly are they starting bank systems to enable Moscow to enter a parallel economic system? You said it wasn't economic. Clearly, every analyst you talk to in China or Russia says this war in Ukraine is economic because it may presage the end of the dollar.
What?
Well, it's not economic in the sense that I don't think it's motivated. It's not motivated by economics. It may have economic consequences.
RTee News.
But I think it's much too early to see. At least for me, it's too early to see what those economic consequences are. China could make Russia dependent on its technology or its institutions or whatever, and that maybe they'll be able to make Russia a client state of China. I don't know. I do think China is very sophisticated technologically in many ways. It's been competing on many margins with Western technology and Western institutions, and this is another instance of it, and it creates a kind of pretext for them to do things that perhaps they didn't think of doing before. But but I think it's hard for me at the moment to see what the long-run economic consequences are. My point was just it's not motivated by economics. I think the economic consequences of Russia are surely going to, the economic consequences of Ukraine are surely going to be disastrous. I think the economic consequences for Russia are going to be disastrous too. What are they going to be for China? I don't know.
You don't think Russia was tired of the sanctions? All the sanctions that have gone on for so many years? Just as Iran is tired of the sanctions, Venezuela is tired of the sanctions.
My impression is that the sanctions didn't really have much impact on anything in Russia. The Russian elite went on with their business and their lifestyles, and they kept on selling natural resources, and Putin. So it doesn't seem to it didn't seem to really have a big impact on what was going on. So I'd be surprised if that was what precipitated this.
Obviously China's been annoyed about sanctions against China too, but the only way to ultimately evade sanctions is to destroy the power, clearly, of the dollar. So I suppose one other aspect of this is Saudi Arabia. Could it fill the gap in terms of energy resources that is being removed from the market and resulting in, I don't know what the gas prices are like at the petrol pump, as we call them over here in Chicago, but obviously the working classes are paying with their lives in Ukraine and Luhansk and Donetsk, and they're paying a price now, not having to choose between heating and eating, as we often say on this program, where you live, 40 million can only eat tonight by virtue of food stamps.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the incentives of the Saudi Arabians are. I'm sure that the United States government would be
climate change initiative
to increase production. But I expect the Saudis are very happy to see oil prices increase. and it's very good, for some governments like Venezuela, you were mentioning earlier, because the Venezuelan government does well when the oil price goes up, they have money to spread around and buy support and popularity. So I don't know that there will be a big enough increase in production to actually, maybe it will ameliorate the price rise, but I expect oil prices are going to go up and we'll be stuck with that.
So is this conflict a global conflict?
I wouldn't say, I don't, that's a good question. It's having global repercussions, global repercussions politically, economically. I think it's actually having a rather good effect of making Western European countries realise that, many of their institutions have atrophied.